guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, Neighbor Likes to Park in Front of My House. Okay then. A few years ago, I moved to a new neighborhood. The area was beautiful, and I was excited to be living in such a nice place. However, things changed when my neighbor started parking his truck behind my car, literally inches away, for no reason. He had his own driveway, and his house was 2 houses down the street. I asked him politely if he could park a bit further down the road, but he refused, stating that there was no law against parking there. After a few weeks of tolerating his behavior, my car got hit by another vehicle that couldn't see it because my neighbor's truck was blocking the view entirely. I confronted my neighbor again, but he refused to change his behavior, saying that I should just suck on it. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I did some research and found out that my neighbor had his own business, and his truck had his business name on it. I checked his website, but it didn't load up. I then went to Whois and saw that the domain wasn't registered, so I snagged it. Before I thought of what to do with it, I searched for my neighbor's name and found out that he had been convicted of murdering a child 20 years ago. I couldn't believe it. I copied and pasted all the links detailing his story into an email to him, threatening to post them on the website I now owned if he continued to park behind my car. Within an hour, his truck was moved into his driveway, and I felt relieved. However, things didn't end there. The next day, my neighbor showed up at my door, demanding that I hand over the domain name. I refused, telling him that I would only give it to him if he moved away or I did. Days passed, and I thought I had won. However, one night, I woke up to the sound of shattering glass. When I looked outside, I saw my car's windows were smashed, and my neighbor's truck was nowhere to be seen. I called the police and filed a report. They questioned my neighbor, but he denied any involvement. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to move away and sell my house. 2 weeks before the sale, my neighbor showed up at my door again, demanding the domain name. This time, he had a gun in his hand. I panicked and tried to close the door, but he pushed it open and forced his way inside. I thought it was the end for me, but suddenly, I heard sirens outside. The police had arrived, and they arrested my neighbor for attempted murder. It turned out that he had smashed my car's windows and had planned to kill me that night. I was lucky to be alive, and I was glad to be leaving that neighborhood. However, I had one more thing to do. I handed over the domain name to my neighbor's wife, who had been unaware of his past and his behavior. She thanked me and apologized for her husband's actions. Update. After the incident, I moved to a different state and started a new life. I never heard from my neighbor or his wife again. However, I did see a news article a few months later about my neighbor's trial. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. I was glad that justice was served, and I hoped that my former neighbor's wife and family could move on from this tragedy. The next story is titled, Part 3. My parents and Dan were back sooner than I thought. And they wanted money this time. This will not surprise some people who commented on my previous posts, because my parents did some of the exact things they said they would. Which was wanting either my money or my signature. I did expect the classic lines of narcissists saying that I owed them or give me some kind of socialist BS of sharing the wealth. But that was just my imagination running wild. The ensuing situation was somewhat similar to that. But much more tame, I guess you could say. They seemed to know not to push me too far now. And were mostly aiming for pity. It began when my parents recently got in touch with me through social media and asked for a meeting in a public place of my choosing. It just screamed trap. But I wasn't afraid. In fact, I was amused. They know I'm not to be ducked with anymore. So, I could only wonder what they wanted this time. I picked a local restaurant that may have a name of an olive and a garden in it, and we met up there. Dan was with them. But he kept his mouth shut, most of the time. We had awkward greetings, ordered some drinks, and then cut to the chase. My parents begged me to help Dan get his own apartment so he could finally move out. Apparently, Dan's credit isn't so great. Gee, I wonder why? Could it be his wife regularly spends him into a hole? Well, they asked that I help by either supplying some capital, or by co-signing for the apartment and helping to pay the rent for it. I simply said no to both. That's when Dan spoke up in anger and yelled at me that I have so much, and I don't have a family to support like he does. He needed my help, and I should be sparing the money for his family since I don't have one myself. I laughed and asked where they were when I needed their help. That's right. They were pointing and laughing at me for being homeless. Or should we go further back to my childhood? I'd love to delve into that with plenty of ears to listen in around us. My mother grabbed my hand and begged me not to speak of any of it. My father and Dan both just looked away and said nothing. Pretty sure they wanted to say something like they used to at me but held their tongues. I asked them if they thought I was rich or something. And their looks said it all. And when I told them I don't have that kind of money, they looked at me like deer in headlights. I broke it down about how much I'd managed to save for the down payment on my house, and the way I had to live and work in order to save that much so fast. And then how I spent nearly all of it on the down payment of my house. I'm still in financial recovery. I did have monthly income to spare, yes. But most of it was going right into my savings. I asked Dan what his yearly salary was, and when he told me, I pointed out that it was actually a bit higher than mine. I then loosely broke things down in rough math in front of my parents on how about 70% of my income goes to my mortgage, insurance, gasoline, internet, phone, food, and other bills. And then there's maybe 30% of that left at most that I can put into savings. And I need that money saved to get back on my feet in time. And I have to make sure I have savings to fall back on. My truck is from the 90s. If it were to break down, I'd need money to either fix or replace it. And there's other things one would need a rainy day fund for, like home repairs, doctors, taxes, lawyers, or anything in general you'd need quick cash for when it's a sudden unexpected expense. So, as you can see, I just can't spare money for Dan. And I also refuse to co-sign for anything as that would leave me on the hook for any bill Dan couldn't or wouldn't pay. Then I pointed out that's likely why my parents didn't co-sign for Dan's apartment themselves long ago. And my mother just started crying again. I was pretty much one step ahead of them in all of this. I'm not an ATM, and I'm not a fool. And I stated that right to their faces. I expected my father to become angry with me like he always does. But this time he just, didn't. I've known this man to explode on me for the slightest provocation of not enabling my brother all of my life. But this time he just didn't do that. There wasn't even a sneer on his face. The only way I could describe the look he had was regret and defeat. Maybe regret for being a shitty parent. Or maybe regret because he can't bully me around anymore. Who knows? Either way, my parents couldn't really argue with me, and I wasn't about to give them any money. Dan just got up and said this was all just a waste of their time, and that he was leaving. My mother started apologizing for him, but Dan still wanted to leave. Then just to kill with kindness I offered to buy them a round of unlimited soup and salad while we were all there. I guess they couldn't turn down free food since we hadn't ordered anything but drinks yet, and they stayed. I went out of my way to talk about anything other than money. Dan remained quiet and was either eating his food or looking at his phone. But my parents just awkwardly talked with me. They brought up that they've recently joined a local Christian church. And that they'd already been going for the last 2 weeks. I said, good for them, and they of course started trying to advertise that they'd like me to go too. I simply said no thanks, and they were smart enough not to push further. When the meal was finished, Dan left a $10 on the table for the tip and walked off without saying another word to me or anyone. My mother just excused his behavior and we all parted ways. That was about it. Not nearly as much drama as either there'd be. But this is still far better than how things used to be with my parents and brother. As for Sil, well, she's been regularly complaining online about my parents. She really doesn't seem to like the fact that she's not queen bee of their house. And I think her toxic is finally getting to them. Why else would they be so desperate to come crawling back to me? Sil actually wants my parents to move into a camper like I had to do in order to make space in the house. And she's being told, no, every time. She does seem to have a following of Karen-minded people like her though. Because here and there I get messaged by someone I don't know, that are intent on raging at me for not giving up my house for Sil. I don't bother to argue with these people anymore. I just block and move on. Though there was one persistent troll who had my phone number. And they call from a different number every time. Yes, it seems to be the same person who called me to say I need to make way for a real family man like Dan. But I could care less. The calls though, seem to have slowed down, if not maybe stopped. Because I made it clear to that person that they were only amusing me by keeping this up so long. The last time they called was around the beginning of the month. And it's been silence from them since then. The next story is entitled Neighbor Mows Our Lawn Without Permission Then Expects Payment. So, our neighbor is new to the street. 6 months tops. He owns a mowing service and wakes me nearly every morning at 4:20 a.m. using power tools of some kind out the front before he heads to work. So last week my husband started to whipper-snip the front, however a storm came across and he had to come inside before he could mow. On the weekend we hear both neighbors start mowing at 8 a.m. as we are getting the kids ready for a birthday party. I look out the front and see the new neighbor on his ride on doing our front lawn. As I notice him, he finishes and goes back next door. I mentioned it to my husband, and we are both feeling pretty awkward about it as we haven't formally met them, and why is he randomly mowing our lawn? Is he being nice? What is this? We head out to the kids' party and arrive home midday. Under the door is a bill for lawn mowing. The cheeky sod was asking for a $55 for 30 minutes on his ride-on. That we didn't ask for. I take the bill to their house and hand it to his wife, explaining we weren't paying as we never asked him to mow and we are extremely confused by the situation. She honestly didn't even look shocked at what her husband did. She said she will give it back to him and that was it. We are thinking they were trying to scam us into paying. Seriously, who charges $110 per hour for a mowing service? The next story is titled, Tell Me I Shouldn't Buy Delicate Binoculars Without Insurance? Fine, I won't buy them then. Many years ago, I had some hospitality tickets for F1 at Silverstone. I think it was the year Hamilton won his first season. I decide to get some binoculars to take with me, so I go to the local Jessops and talk to a very nice sales lady, who seems genuinely excited at the idea of going to F1 at Silverstone. She suggests some binoculars and I get my wallet out. At which point sales guy comes bounding over, pushes sales lady out of the way, grabs the binoculars I was going to buy from her, and asks what I am thinking of using them for. Barely lets me answer as he grabs some that me and sales lady had already discounted, because they were twice as much, and suggests that they would be a much better option. Mildly irritated at this point, I was enjoying chatting to sales lady. I list some of the reasons that she told me they weren't a good fit. Sales guy rolls his eyes, says she just a trainee, and the expensive ones are really the ones I want. Eventually it takes quite a stern no, to stop him trying to upsell me. At this point I really just want to walk out the shop, but I suffer from the occasionally debilitating condition of being English, and that kind of embarrassment is just too much to take. Instead, I'll buy them, and go home fantasizing about all of the cool things I should have said. So, card in hand, I'm just about to pay and he asks about whether I want insurance. No, just that thanks. You really should have insurance, they are very delicate, it doesn't take much to knock a lens out of alignment. No, it's fine, just the binoculars please. You probably shouldn't buy them without the insurance. Finally given a way out, I nod and agree, and he runs out the back to get the paperwork for the insurance. He comes back and asks me for my name, for the insurance. Oh no, sorry, I was agreeing with you that I shouldn't buy them, not if they are that delicate. I'm quite clumsy, so I'd definitely break them. He tries to backtrack on some of the ones that saleslady had suggested, saying that they would actually be perfect for me. I reminded him he said they weren't very good. Then I thanked him for helping me see that I really didn't need to spend all of that money on binoculars and walked out. The last story is titled, We Got a Pushy Applicant. I am an office manager for a woodworking shop. There's not a lot of woodworking shops in the area, and as a whole the woodworking community is pretty small and we're all friendly. The manager of another company, Wayne, got his start here and is still fishing buddies with one of our shop managers. We have two, Bob and Bill. It's tight-knit. We are looking for woodworkers with 3 to 5 years experience and have advertised for it. 2 weeks ago, I get a call and the guy, let's call him Nick, is peppering me about the position. I start to tell him we need experienced, and he cuts me off and said he wants the lead woodworker position. I try to tell him, we don't have a lead woodworker position, our woodworkers work for the shop manager, a position that is filled. But he keeps cutting me off to tell me about his experience. I'm simply the office manager, receptionist. I tell him to send over his resume and we will review it and call him if we want to bring him in for an interview. Well, last Friday, he comes in with his resume. Despite us having on our door since 2020, we are by appointment only. He fills out the application, keeps asking questions, but talks over our HR manager when she's trying to answer. He wants an interview right there. Bill comes out to tell him that he will review the resume and then call him to let him know a good time to come in for an interview. Guy insists again that he wants a lead position. He is told that we don't work like that. He tried to argue with the Bill, who tells him, "I will call you." Nick leaves. Well, it turns out, Nick freelanced for us before in 2015. It was a pretty big project and he kept derailing it by not taking direction and trying to order everyone else around. He went to work elsewhere when we kept him as freelance because we didn't have any other big projects coming up. "If you won't make me a full employee, I will go elsewhere," kind of fit. So, Bill doesn't want him. On his resume, he listed Wayne's company as his last job. Bob calls Wayne, who could only say, "We would not rehire him." Another employee in the finishing department quietly warns Bill that Nick was texting him bragging that he's going to be his boss. Finishing is a different department than woodworking. "So, we have decided not to interview him. He just called, 'Hi, this is Nick, and I want to schedule my interview for this week.' I tell him that we will call him when we are ready for the interview. He wants to talk to HR, who isn't in until 9:15. I send him to voicemail because I was too floored by the audacity. We just had a quick meeting to reaffirm that he is not a fit for our company culture. HR and the shop managers are still trying to figure out the most definitive way to tell him we will not hire him. Thank you for listening.